In South Africa, the Department of Agriculture has lifted the suspension on the movement of cattle around the country that came about because of foot and mouth disease. Today, we'll get into the impact of this on the industry, as well as the multi-billion-dollar industry that South Africa has that maybe other African countries can learn from. We'll also get into Stock Market Watch, looking at some of the developments here in Nigeria from the NGX, finally ending the week possibly bullish. Our guests will definitely be answering that. You're welcome to Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Let's get started with the African business headlines. Africa's second largest crude oil producer, Angola, has now become the continent's largest crude oil producer, at least for the month of August. Angola's average daily output of 1.17 million barrels was more than Nigeria's, which stood at 1.13 million barrels for the month of August. The last time this rearranging of ranking happened was in April 2017, when both nations were pumping just about 500,000 barrels a day. In East Africa, Kenyan grain traders are seeking to import, or rather those seeking to import maize from Tanzania will now be required to register their companies in Dar es Salaam as the country imposes stricter rules to protect its commodities and jobs from moving abroad. Tanzania's new move, which comes as a new trade barrier between the two countries, will have an impact on Kenya's food security, as the Kenyan economy relies heavily on cross-border stocks from Tanzania to bridge the annual deficit. The International Finance Corporation is buying 19.2 billion Kenyan shillings worth, about $160 million of shares from Safaricom and its partners in the Ethiopian venture. This will shrink their combined shares by 15.5%. Kenya's biggest telco is the major shareholder in the Ethiopia venture with a stake of 55.7%. The entry of the IFC as a shareholder could also see its ownership drop to below the 50% mark, reducing its exposure in the second most populous nation on the continent. President-elect William Ruto's incoming administration has at least 30 critical appointments to make at state-owned firms whose current chief executives are either serving in acting capacities or at the tail end of their terms. To ensure fair play and equal representation, the Kenyan Constitution has introduced the ethnic representation requirement to check a historical trend where the tribesmen of those in power were favored during recruitment. And we're back in West Africa, where Ghana's Deputy Finance Minister, Dr. John Kuma, has denied claims that the cedi is the weakest currency in Africa. According to him, such a claim is propaganda meant to undermine the government's fiscal measures in halting the free fall of the cedi against the dollar. Dr. Kuma says that the cedi is currently the third strongest currency in Africa. However, he did concede that the rate of depreciation of the Ghanaian currency is probably one of the worst right now on the continent. And those are a few headlines we have for you at this moment. When we come back, we'll get into our first conversation of the day, which takes us to the southern parts of the continent. South Africa's Department of Agriculture has lifted the suspension on all movement of cattle in the country. Now, the suspension was a result of an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. According to the Agriculture Minister, the disease was detected on farms, feedlots, and communal areas in KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Northwest, and 3 others. I have Corine Steyn, Manager Liaison and Company Secretary for the National Red Meat Producers Organization, joining me on Business Edge. Corine, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon. What a privilege to talk to you and to all the viewers. Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so let's start with this. For those who don't really know, particularly with the issue of foot and mouth disease, take us through what the issue is, particularly for South Africa. And it's not a new problem, but this particular one did, in fact, have to warrant a suspension of about 21 days of the movement of cattle around South Africa. So give us a background.
Okay, it is important to know that South Africa in the past had a foot and mouth free zone status. That was adjacent to the Kruger National Park, the northern provinces of KZN and Mpumalanga, and then Limpopo. So what happened if there is an outbreak of foot and mouth in this endemic area, it didn't impact on trade in the rest of South Africa. So in November 2019, two stray cattle was walked out of the controlled area, and at that time it wasn't an issue or a big issue at all. But what happened afterwards is that we lost our foot and mouth status or our free zone status with the World Organization for Animal Health, and the problem just escalated that these animals or infected animals was transported out of this endemic area. And they ended up in livestock auctions in the Northwest province. And that actually was where the biggest outbreak in South Africa since long gone actually took place. And at the moment, there's DMAs within the Limpopo province, the KZN province that was from 2019 to 2020. And that was now escalated to a large part of the central region or the Free State province. Not the whole province, but a certain demarcated area as proclaimed by the minister.
Okay, so now we're here, and this suspension was just lifted yesterday, and there are a lot of questions in regards to what has happened in those 21 days. So the 3 weeks where the suspension happened, and now it's been lifted. Has your organization been able to quantify the impact? Because this movement also means there was really no buying, there was no exportation, there was basically a breakdown in the business or trading activities involving cattle and livestock in South Africa. So have you been able to quantify the impact of the suspension?
No, unfortunately not. But it is also important to know that it was not only the primary red meat sector that suffered due to this ban. This also influenced other role players in the red meat value chain, such as auctioneers, because now auctions could have been held, feedlots, as well as livestock transporters. The cost currently is still unknown. And it had a huge influence not only on the producer price, because, of course, remember, the beef that was labeled for export to our biggest export market, China, had to be absorbed within the domestic market now. So that had a huge influence on our producer price in South Africa as well. So to answer your question, no, at the moment, to quantify what the severe loss is, unfortunately, is not known at the moment.
And it's interesting you talk about the value chain and also your biggest export market being China. So a lot of people don't know just how big South Africa's livestock market is. And I think this would be a good opportunity to really talk about the impact of this industry, the number of jobs that the industry caters for, as well as the export potential and, of course, the money that's being brought in. So really, how big is South Africa's livestock industry?
Well, if you take that on consumer level in South Africa only, you're talking nearly 80 billion rand, South Africa rand. That is on consumer level. So within the value chain, everyone contributes to the industry itself. Currently, according to Stats SA, we contribute to about 60,000 jobs within the livestock industry only in South Africa. So that the livestock industry actually is about 30% of the agricultural GDP in South Africa. It's by far the biggest agricultural commodity in South Africa as well.
And that's really fascinating to hear. So with the spread of foot and mouth disease in the industry, as you mentioned, there were a number of knockdown effects, the auctioneers, the transporters, but there was also the issue of affecting the exports of wool, beef, and other livestock products, facing some restrictions in China, as you said, being your key market. Now that this suspension has been lifted, how long do you think it will take for activities to return back to normal? Do we expect to see an immediate situation where farmers are able to go back to selling and moving things around and even getting back to exporting the livestock?
Okay, it is important to know that all the exports from South Africa, especially to China, is by means of bilateral agreements. So with regards to the wool exports, the wool farmers had to adhere to certain principles and guidelines as set out by the Chinese government within the bilateral agreements. So it was for a few months that the ban was introduced, actually years. And the wool industry also made a large loss with regards to the wool that was in South Africa and couldn't be exported. Now I've completely lost the question. But anyway, with regards to wool, the ban is now lifted.
Okay.
So we trust that with the specific, with the new proclamation of the ban that was lifted, the Minister of Agriculture actually introduced disease management areas within South Africa. So all the farmers outside the DMAs can actually go forward and do trade under certain strict measurements, like health declarations that needs to be issued by a veterinarian, and they can also move their animals from farm to farm or farm to auction or farm to feedlot. But that is only applicable for farmers outside the DMA. Now, the farmers within the DMA, they can also slaughter their animals for commercial purposes as well as for own consumption. Again, that is under very strict permits and guidelines as set out by the Animal Diseases Act in South Africa. So yeah, it is at the moment, it is a bleak picture for especially farmers within that DMAs, but we are very, very confident that the spread will be curbed, as this is the reason why the DMAs was proclaimed. And the movement in and out from this DMA is very restricted.
Okay, so let's follow up with that, because I know that your organization released a statement which also talks about a turnaround strategy, also mentioning even how the government has addressed and handled this situation. What do you think the ministry, the agriculture ministry, and even overall the government could have done, given the fact that there are some 60,000 jobs that could have been even more severely impacted, and of course money to be made that has not been made in the past several weeks? And also take us through the turnaround strategy that you're proposing in a way for the industry.
Well, the RPO believes in constructive engagement with government. Government is they are the policy makers of the day. So if you can't work together with government and come up with a solution, well, then really the whole industry will just go to waste. So we believe in constructive engagement with government, and that our view is that the solution lies within public-private partnerships with government itself. The RPO, together with the National Animal Health Forum, collaborated very positively with a government since the first outbreak in 2019 to come up with solutions. And we are also working together with industry-orientated technical task team members that inter alia also international experts on food and mouth. And together with them and the department, we are busy to draw up a medium long-term strategy for the way forward. One of the outcomes is to develop a vaccine specifically for South Africa, for the strains of foot and mouth that occurs in South Africa as well. We are very adamant, and luckily the Minister of Agriculture also see our point of view, that the development of these vaccines should be based on free market principles, and that commercial companies also need or will have the opportunity to develop these vaccines. Currently, South Africa imports the foot and mouth disease vaccine from Botswana. We don't have our own vaccine because in the past it was only located in that endemic area, and we hadn't had this outbreak in many a year. So we are busy with government to come up with a solution, not only for our producers, but also for the whole red meat value chain.
Okay, so Corine, now that I have you here, I also want to ask about another challenge. Maybe not just a full challenge for the industry, but one that might be building. So aside from this disease outbreak, another possible challenge for South Africa's livestock industry is the rise of meat analogs. Now, in recent times, there's been a lot of conversation about this vegan meat substitute, which has seen a staggering rise in popularity across the world. Globally, total consumption grew from 133 million kilograms in 2013 to 470 million kilograms in 2020. And many meat producers maintain that labeling these products with meat is actually something that confuses consumers. And recently, there's been a conversation around removing these meat analogs from the shelves in South Africa because of the terminology of meat. And there is now a court case around that has been stopped for now. But where does your organization stand on this?
The RPO within the Red Meat Industry Forum is part of, as I said, the whole value chain. We make use of the South African Meat Industry Company, or SAMIC as they are known. And SAMIC's core business is actually to audit all retail outlets in South Africa. They also audit the brands, the specific red meat brands in South Africa. So what happens is that if we and all of our work is based on research in South Africa as well. The RPO also has a specific section focusing on the consumer education of meat, lamb and mutton specifically in the consumer market. But with regards to the meat in the retail, South Africa has an act that actually legislates the labeling of meat products. And then we have within our standards committee, we also look at GI indicators. Now, GI indicators actually means the geographic indicators of a specific area. So if you talk about Karoo lamb, and that Karoo lamb is sold in the northern parts of South Africa, and everybody knows the Karoo is in the central and southern Africa, that GI indicator actually protects that specific region with regards to a brand. Now that is also transferred onto this whole thing about alternative meat source. So in South Africa, we actually have legislation that see to this kind of problem, that meat can't be labeled as red meat if it isn't certified 90% as a red meat source.
Okay, so it looks like something that might continue as a conversation in the future, but right now we're working to see the industry through the foot and mouth disease outbreak. Suspension has been lifted. If you had to give a round ballpark timeline, when do you think things will really be back to normal daily activities?
Well, that is now a very good question. I think what happened with these animals that was sold in the Northwest on the auctions, the Northwest province actually made good strides in curbing that specific outbreak. So I'm positive that with the DMA, both in Free State as well as in KZN, if we can curb the spread of the disease, I think the whole ban will be lifted in due course. I'm not going to talk specifics here, but I do know that the Animal Diseases Act actually talks about a time period of 28 days in quarantine. So if we can curb this serious outbreak now, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel that the ban will be lifted in
Fully.
a month or two.
All
What
right.
to need to be kept in mind is that if we want to get our foot and mouth status back with the OIE, that will actually take a very long time, actually a few years.
All right. And that means there is work to be done. Corine Steyn, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. And South Africa's beef industry is probably the most developed on the continent, as you said, as my guest said, responsible for about 60,000 jobs and around 30% of the agricultural sector output in the country. It is a three-digit, multi-billion-dollar industry that South Africa is running concerning meat. It's fascinating, and possibly other countries might want to look at how that's being done. So what could be on your table and your plate could actually end up bringing foreign currency into your nation's economy. You're watching Business Edge. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we have some of the latest foreign business headlines for you.